Then stay home, broke girl. Ashley's voice dripped with condescension, her laughter ringing through the family group chat, as if she had just delivered the joke of the century. I could practically hear the smirks forming on the rest of their faces, the unspoken agreement that I had finally been put in my place. I just nodded, not bothering to defend myself, not even attempting to explain why, after years of being the family's personal travel fund, I had finally drawn the line. There was no point in arguing, no reason to remind them that I had footed the bill for more vacations than I could count, covering flights, accommodations, and meals for people who never even pretended they would pay me back. Instead, I let them believe what they wanted. If they needed to think I was broke, that was fine by me. After all, I had something better planned. It had started the same way it always did. One of my aunts had casually dropped a message in the chat about this year's family trip, pretending to check in with everyone while conveniently skipping over the part where they expected me to pay. They never outright asked, never acknowledged the reality that I was the only one in the group with an actual stable income, the only one who had made smart financial decisions instead of constantly relying on handouts. It was always the same dance. They'd pick a destination, get excited, and then, when it was time to book, they'd suddenly fall silent, waiting for me to step up and handle everything. But this time, I didn't take the bait. Instead, I kept my response short and direct, telling them that I just couldn't afford it this year. The reaction was immediate: disbelief, annoyance, then thinly veiled frustration that their golden ticket had finally expired. Ashley, of course, was the first to openly mock me, her privilege radiating through the screen like a bad perfume. She had never paid for anything in her life, never worked a day at a job she hated, never known the stress of budgeting because she had always found someone else to carry the burden for her. And for years, that someone had been me. I could have reminded her about all the times I had covered her expenses, all the times she had conveniently forgotten her wallet or claimed her card wasn't working, but I knew it wouldn't matter. In her mind, I had been stupid enough to do it before, and now that I wasn't willing, it must mean I had finally hit rock bottom. She laughed like it was the funniest thing in the world, like watching me struggle was some kind of entertainment. "Guess you'll just have to stay home this time, broke girl," she taunted, and that was when I made my decision. I didn't argue. I didn't get defensive. I simply nodded, told them I understood, and let them move forward with their plans. They patted themselves on the back for putting me in my place, gloating about how they would have the time of their lives while I sat at home, wallowing in my supposed misfortune. Meanwhile, I quietly logged onto a luxury travel site, browsed through the available private villas, and booked something that made their all-inclusive budget resort look like a rundown roadside motel.
Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
It wasn't just any villa. It was secluded, beachfront, complete with an infinity pool, a personal chef, and a staff dedicated to making my stay as perfect as possible. Every single thing about it screamed luxury, a level of indulgence they could never dream of affording even if they combined all their incomes together. The best part? I wasn't going to tell them a thing. The moment I hit the confirmation button, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, a sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with finally putting myself first. No more guilt-tripping, no more last-minute Venmo requests, no more pretending I didn't mind being used. For the first time in years, I was taking a vacation on my terms, without a single relative expecting me to pick up the check. A few days later, they sent pictures in the chat, all huddled together in the airport, proudly announcing their departure like they were heading on some exclusive adventure. The flight was cramped, their hotel rooms tiny, the meals repetitive and bland, but they were all smiles, knowing they had managed to exclude me from their fun. Ashley sent a separate message just for me, a voice note dripping with fake sympathy as she said, "Hope you're doing okay, Rach. Must be tough sitting this one out." I smiled as I stared at my own boarding pass, first class, window seat, champagne already waiting for me. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I sat in the quiet lounge of the airport, sipping on an espresso that tasted far too expensive for what it was, yet perfectly fitting for the moment I was about to step into. I scrolled through the family group chat, watching their excitement bubble over in the form of blurry airport selfies and giddy messages about how they were finally getting a vacation, as if they hadn't been freeloading off me for the last 5 years. My cousin Ashley had already sent at least 3 messages bragging about how she had managed to fit everything into a carry-on, which, knowing her, meant she had fully intended to mooch off someone else's luggage space the moment they landed. The rest of them were debating which resort restaurant to try first, with my uncle making some offhand joke about how they would finally get their money's worth by stuffing themselves at the buffet. I didn't bother responding, just let them have their fun, because in a few short hours, they would be standing in a long customs line, waiting to squeeze into their cramped shuttle, while I would be stepping into something they couldn't even dream of affording. The villa had been a last-minute decision, an indulgence I hadn't originally planned for, but one that now felt completely justified after the way they had laughed at me. If they had simply accepted my decision to skip the trip without making it into some cruel joke, maybe I would have stayed home. Maybe I would have let them enjoy their budget vacation without rubbing my own plans in their faces. But they hadn't, and that one little moment, the way Ashley had sneered, the way my aunts had chuckled, the way my mother had stayed silent instead of defending me, had pushed me just far enough to make sure I did this the right way. I hadn't just booked a vacation. I had booked a private escape. The villa was perched on a stretch of coastline that was entirely secluded, surrounded by lush greenery and an endless view of the ocean, with an infinity pool that looked like it melted straight into the horizon. A personal chef was included with the stay, along with a housekeeper and a driver, which meant I wouldn't have to lift a finger the entire time I was there. I had splurged on the best suite in the villa, one with floor-to-ceiling windows that allowed me to wake up to the sun rising over the water, something that felt like a scene straight out of a luxury travel magazine. There would be no screaming children at the pool, no rushed buffet lines, no overcrowded shuttle buses, or cheap cocktails watered down with too much ice. Just me, my peace, and an experience they could never have. Boarding my flight was almost comical in comparison to what they were about to endure. While they were packed into economy, stuffed into middle seats, and arguing over who got the window, I was stepping onto the plane with a glass of champagne handed to me before I even sat down. The flight attendants addressed me by name, offered me a menu with options that didn't look like microwave disappointment, and I stretched out in my fully reclining seat while the rest of the passengers crammed their bags into overhead bins. I imagined them back in their seats, elbows pressed uncomfortably together, trying to convince themselves that this was all part of the experience, that their budget resort would make up for the uncomfortable start. The best part was that they still thought I was at home, probably eating leftovers and watching television, bitter and alone while they set off on their adventure. Ashley had even sent me a separate message, a single crying laughing emoji, as if to remind me that she was going somewhere and I was not. I let her have her fun, let her sit there in her tiny seat while I enjoyed a meal that had been plated like something out of a 5-star restaurant, let her think that she had somehow won when she hadn't even begun to realize how much she had lost. By the time I landed, my phone had already started buzzing with their complaints. Their layover had been delayed, the airport food was overpriced, and my uncle was already making comments about how their hotel better have strong drinks because he was not about to deal with this mess sober. I chuckled, setting my phone to Do Not Disturb before stepping into the private car waiting to take me to my villa. The air was warm but not suffocating, the breeze carrying the scent of salt water and something faintly floral, and for the first time in years, I felt the tension in my shoulders finally begin to fade. The drive to the villa was quiet, scenic, nothing like the overcrowded chaos I knew they would be dealing with. I imagined them shoving their way through the hotel lobby, waiting in line to check in, only to discover that their rooms weren't ready yet, forced to sit in the lounge area with their suitcases while exhausted staff tried to accommodate dozens of impatient guests. Meanwhile, my driver pulled up to a private gate, entered a code, and I was escorted straight to my villa, where an entire team of staff was already waiting to welcome me with cool towels and a cocktail crafted specifically to my taste. I stepped inside and let out a slow breath as I took in my surroundings, the open floor plan, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the ocean, the private pool glistening under the sunlight. The living room alone was bigger than most apartments, decorated with sleek modern furniture that somehow still felt warm and inviting. Everything about it was perfect, effortlessly elegant, the kind of place people saved up for years to experience just once in their lifetime. And yet, here I was, standing in the middle of it, knowing that I had earned this, that I had paid for this with my own money, on my own terms, without a single ungrateful hand reaching into my pockets. I walked out onto the terrace, letting the warm breeze brush against my skin, the sound of the waves crashing against the shore below me. My phone buzzed once more. Another photo sent in the family group chat, a blurry image of their shared hotel room, 3 beds crammed into a space meant for 2, the lighting dim, the walls a shade of beige that screamed, budget travel. Ashley had captioned it, "Living our best lives," followed by a string of emojis, as if adding colorful symbols would somehow make their situation look better than it was. I smirked, taking my own photo, a shot of the infinity pool, the ocean stretching endlessly beyond it, a drink resting beside me on the edge. I didn't add a caption. I didn't need to. I simply hit post. The sun was warm against my skin as I stretched out on the plush lounge chair beside my private infinity pool, the sound of waves crashing in the distance blending with the soft rustle of palm trees swaying in the breeze. The drink in my hand was perfectly chilled, condensation slipping down the side of the glass as I took another slow sip, letting the flavors of fresh citrus and something slightly floral linger on my tongue. The morning had already been filled with an indulgent breakfast prepared by the villa's private chef, a spread so perfectly arranged it looked like something straight out of a Michelin-starred restaurant rather than a simple morning meal. I had barely lifted a finger since I arrived, every single detail of my stay handled by staff whose sole job was to make sure I experienced absolute relaxation. I had spent the last 2 days alternating between floating in the pool, getting deep tissue massages that melted away the tension of years spent catering to ungrateful relatives, and savoring meals that tasted like they had been crafted by culinary gods. Each bite was a reminder of what true indulgence felt like, each sip of my drink a quiet celebration of finally choosing myself over people who had never once considered what I needed. The villa was a masterpiece of design, modern and elegant, with open-air spaces that made it feel like I was part of the landscape rather than just a visitor. The bed alone was softer than any hotel mattress I had ever encountered, with linens so smooth and cool that slipping into them at night felt like sinking into a cloud. My phone had remained on silent for most of my stay, ignored except for the occasional glance at messages that held no real importance to me. The family group chat had been a constant stream of updates, each one more chaotic than the last, painting a picture of a vacation that was far from the dreamy escape they had envisioned. Complaints had started rolling in almost immediately after their arrival. Delays at check-in, rooms that looked nothing like the polished photos on the website, overcrowded pools filled with screaming children, and a buffet that seemed to recycle the same underwhelming dishes day after day. My uncle had already made a joke about needing to find the nearest fast food chain because he wasn't about to pay resort prices for frozen fish sticks, while my aunt had ranted about the weak Wi-Fi signal that made streaming impossible. Ashley, of course, had taken to documenting every aspect of their trip, determined to make it seem like they were living a lavish lifestyle despite the clear signs of disappointment in every photo she posted. The angles were strategic, carefully cropped to hide the worn-down decor, and the fact that she was sharing a small, poorly lit room with 2 other people. The captions were full of exaggerated enthusiasm, each one attempting to convince anyone watching that she was having the time of her life. I could see the cracks forming, the subtle hints of frustration peeking through the carefully curated illusion, and it made every single moment of my own trip feel that much sweeter. They still assumed I was at home, sulking in my apartment, too broke to do anything but scroll through their updates with jealousy. Ashley had even sent me a direct message, a smug little check-in disguised as concern, asking if I was hanging in there while attaching a blurry photo of the resort's overcrowded pool. I stared at the message for a long moment, debating whether or not I should bother responding before finally typing out a simple, "Yeah, I'm just relaxing," and sending it off without another thought. It was technically true. I was, in fact, relaxing, just not in the way they assumed. I had made a point not to post anything obvious, not to drop any hints about where I really was, because I wanted them to keep thinking they had won. I wanted them to believe I had been left behind, missing out on their so-called adventure, while I quietly enjoyed a level of luxury they couldn't even begin to comprehend. But as I stood on the terrace that evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, casting a golden glow across the endless expanse of ocean, I decided it was time to plant the first seed of doubt. I snapped a single photo, careful not to include anything that would give away my location, just a simple shot of the sky streaked in shades of orange and pink, the water reflecting the colors like a perfect mirror. It was vague, nondescript, the kind of image that could have been taken from anywhere, yet just intriguing enough to make someone wonder. I hesitated for only a moment before uploading it to my story, letting it sit there like a quiet mystery, waiting to be unraveled. Less than 5 minutes later, Ashley had already viewed it. And just as I expected, the questions started rolling in. The sun was barely up when I rolled out of bed, stretching lazily before padding across the cool marble floors of my villa, the sheer white curtains billowing slightly from the morning breeze drifting in through the open balcony doors. The ocean stretched endlessly before me, waves rolling in with a gentle rhythm that had become my favorite soundtrack since I arrived, replacing the usual chaos of honking cars, buzzing notifications, and the endless demands of family members who never seemed to respect boundaries. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, savoring the rich aroma as I scrolled mindlessly through my phone, half expecting another flood of messages in the family group chat filled with the usual complaints about their trip. Sure enough, they hadn't disappointed. The night before, my cousin Ashley had gone on a rant about the resort's so-called fine dining experience, claiming the steak she had ordered was so overcooked it could have been used as a hockey puck. My aunt had posted about her ongoing battle with the hotel's front desk, demanding a room upgrade after realizing her current one had a broken AC unit and a balcony that overlooked the parking lot instead of the ocean. My uncle, ever the opportunist, had apparently attempted to negotiate a discount at the hotel bar, only to be met with a firm no and a side-eye from the bartender. Even through the screen, I could practically hear their frustration building, their dream vacation unraveling piece by piece, as reality set in that they had overestimated just how much they were actually getting for the price they had paid. I almost felt bad for them, almost. Instead of replying, I placed my phone down and made my way outside, settling onto a cushioned lounge chair beside my infinity pool, the early morning light casting soft golden hues across the water. Breakfast was already being prepared, the scent of something sweet and buttery wafting through the open-air living space, mingling with the salty breeze. I had the entire day to myself with absolutely nothing scheduled except whatever I decided to do, and for the first time in years, I wasn't burdened by the weight of making sure everyone else was taken care of. As I scrolled through my camera roll, a slow smirk spread across my face when I landed on a picture I had taken the night before, a beautifully plated dish, its presentation so perfect it looked like something out of a high-end culinary magazine. The chef had prepared a multi-course meal that had been better than anything I had ever tasted, each dish paired with a carefully selected wine that complemented the flavors in a way I hadn't known was possible. It was a stark contrast to the sad, uninspired buffet meals my family had been posting, their plastic trays filled with lukewarm pasta and questionable meat that looked like it had been sitting under heat lamps for hours. Without thinking much of it, I uploaded the picture to my story, adding no caption, just letting the image speak for itself. It was vague enough that it could have been from any restaurant, any city, any occasion, but knowing my family, it wouldn't take long before the speculation started. It only took 10 minutes before Ashley was the first to comment. "Wait, where are you?" I stared at the message for a few seconds, debating whether or not I should respond, before ultimately deciding against it. Instead, I locked my phone and leaned back, the warmth of the sun soaking into my skin as I allowed myself to fully enjoy the quiet luxury surrounding me. A few hours later, curiosity got the best of me, and when I finally checked my notifications again, I wasn't surprised to see that Ashley had viewed my story at least 5 more times, along with my aunt and a few other family members who rarely ever engaged with my posts. My instincts had been right. They were starting to suspect something. I scrolled through their messages without responding, my amusement growing with every attempt they made to subtly pry for information. My mother had sent a casual, "How's your weekend been?" followed by a very specific, "What have you been up to?" as if she hadn't just seen the exact same picture Ashley had. Another cousin had messaged me separately, claiming they had randomly been thinking about me and wanted to check in, which was the most obvious lie I had ever heard. Ashley, on the other hand, had completely abandoned subtlety, her latest message reading, "Rach, be honest, are you on vacation?" I chuckled to myself, setting my phone aside as I reached for the cocktail that had just been placed beside me, its vibrant colors a perfect contrast to the clear blue water shimmering under the midday sun. The paranoia was setting in, the realization creeping into their minds that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't sitting at home like they had assumed. And just for the fun of it, I decided to push them even further. That evening, as the sky transformed into a breathtaking canvas of deep oranges and purples, I stood on the edge of the terrace and snapped another photo, just a simple shot of the horizon, the water stretching endlessly into the distance, the silhouette of palm trees barely visible in the fading light. I uploaded it without a caption, letting the mystery build, knowing that Ashley and the rest of them would be obsessing over it the moment they saw it. It didn't take long before my phone buzzed again, this time with a single, furious message from Ashley. "Are you on vacation?" I didn't answer. I just smiled, knowing that the real fun was only just beginning. The sun was high in the sky, casting golden light across the glistening surface of the infinity pool, the water so still it looked like a flawless sheet of glass stretching endlessly toward the ocean. A warm breeze carried the scent of salt and fresh citrus from the drink resting on the stone ledge beside me, and for a brief moment, I let myself close my eyes, soaking in the absolute peace that came with knowing I had no obligations, no responsibilities, and no one demanding anything from me. The past few days had been a dream, massages that left my muscles feeling like melted butter, meals that belonged in a five-star restaurant, and hours spent lounging under the sun, free from the usual stress that came with being around my family. But now, as I stood at the edge of the pool, my silk cover-up slipping down one shoulder, my sunglasses perched on my nose, I knew it was time to finally break my silence. I had let them speculate, let them overthink, let the paranoia fester in their group chat like a slow-burning fire waiting for the right gust of wind to explode into flames. I had fed them breadcrumbs, cryptic photos, luxurious meals, vague replies, but now, I was about to drop the match that would set it all ablaze. I lifted my phone, angled it just right to capture the full view. The pristine pool, the endless ocean, the lounge chairs lined with plush towels, and me standing right in the center, looking every bit like a woman who had made all the right choices in life. With one tap, I snapped the photo, adjusted the lighting slightly to enhance the already perfect scene, and without a caption, without a single word of explanation, I hit post. I barely had time to take another sip of my drink before my phone exploded with notifications. The family group chat, which had been relatively quiet for the past few hours, suddenly erupted into an absolute frenzy of messages, the sheer number of them causing my phone to vibrate so continuously that I had to switch it to silent just to stop the madness. I knew exactly what was happening. I could picture it vividly in my head. The moment they all saw the post, the way their jaws must have dropped, the way confusion turned into realization, and realization turned into fury. The first message came from my mother, short but dripping with betrayal. "You lied to us?" Then, before I could even process that, Ashley jumped in, her usual passive-aggressive tone completely abandoned in favor of full-blown rage. "WTF, you said you were broke." I let them keep going, let them spiral deeper into their confusion, let them fire off messages one after another, each one more dramatic than the last. My aunt chimed in, furious that I had apparently deceived them. My uncle asked if this was some kind of joke, and another cousin simply sent a long row of question marks, as if that alone would somehow demand an immediate answer. I finally took my time crafting a response, my fingers gliding effortlessly over the screen as I typed out the one sentence that would shut them all up at once. "I never said I was broke. I said I couldn't afford your trip." The silence that followed was so loud, I could almost hear it through the phone. For the first time since this ridiculous situation had started, no one had an immediate response. It was as if they were collectively rereading the message, trying to wrap their entitled minds around the fact that I had never actually lied to them, never once pretended to be struggling, but had simply refused to continue funding their expectations. The seconds stretched into minutes before Ashley finally recovered from the blow and fired back with the one thing I had been waiting for. "So, what? You just decided to go without us?" I smirked, taking another slow sip of my drink, savoring the moment before delivering the final blow. "Exactly." I could almost hear the distant sound of Ashley's shriek from wherever she was, the frustration bubbling over into something so uncontrollable that it would have been hilarious if it wasn't so pathetic. She wasn't the type to take this lightly, wasn't the type to simply accept defeat and move on. No, Ashley was the kind of person who needed to have the last word, who needed to win at all costs, and if she had to drag the entire family into her personal war against me, she would do it without hesitation. I knew, without a doubt, that she was already plotting her revenge. And honestly, I couldn't wait to see what she did next. Ashley had never been the type to let something go, especially when it involved her pride, and after my last message had effectively shut her down in the family group chat, I knew without a doubt that she wouldn't accept defeat quietly. She had spent years coasting through life on the backs of others, manipulating, guilt-tripping, and demanding things as if they were owed to her. And now, for the first time, she was realizing that the person she had relied on the most had finally drawn the line. She wasn't just angry, she was humiliated, and I knew that meant she was about to do something desperate in an attempt to regain control. As I settled into the plush, heated massage table at the spa, the soft scent of lavender filling the air as a pair of expert hands worked through the last remnants of tension in my shoulders, I could only imagine the absolute meltdown happening on the other side of the world. Ashley, red-faced and fuming, pacing back and forth in her hotel room while aggressively typing messages, trying to figure out how I had managed to pull this off right under their noses. I pictured her ranting to anyone who would listen, complaining about how I had betrayed them, how I had deceived the family, how I had somehow managed to escape their clutches without so much as a warning. And as I had expected, she didn't waste any time before launching into full-blown damage control. The first thing she did was call my mother, her voice dripping with exaggerated concern as she asked if everything was okay, acting as if she were genuinely worried that I had somehow lost my mind and run off on some reckless, impulsive vacation without telling anyone. She played the role of the caring cousin so convincingly that, for a brief moment, even my mother hesitated, confused by the entire situation and unsure of what to believe. But when Ashley pressed further, trying to get any information out of her, my mother could only respond with the truth. She had no idea what was going on because I hadn't told her a single thing. Frustrated, Ashley moved on to my aunts, attempting to stir up outrage among the family, framing the entire situation as if I had somehow wronged them by choosing to take a vacation for myself instead of funding theirs. She made it sound like a personal betrayal, as if my decision to finally set boundaries was an attack on them, as if they had been entitled to my money, my time, and my generosity, and I had suddenly ripped it away without explanation. But to her disappointment, she quickly realized that not everyone shared her outrage. My Aunt Susan, always the most pragmatic of the bunch, had simply laughed and said, "Good for her," before hanging up the phone. Another cousin had apparently responded with nothing more than a thumbs-up emoji, clearly uninterested in whatever scheme Ashley was trying to orchestrate. Even my uncle, who was usually the first to complain when things didn't go his way, had only sighed and muttered something about how maybe I had finally gotten tired of paying for everyone's vacations. Ashley, unwilling to accept that no one else was taking this as seriously as she was, finally resorted to her most ridiculous move yet. She called my workplace. I found out about this later, after a coworker sent me a text filled with barely contained amusement, letting me know that some woman claiming to be my concerned relative had called the office, fishing for information under the guise of making sure I was okay. She had apparently asked if I was still employed there, if I had taken an official leave, and if anyone knew where I was, all while pretending that she was worried about my well-being. But my coworker, who had known me for years and wasn't easily fooled, had simply played dumb, offering nothing beyond vague, non-committal responses before eventually hanging up. Ashley had nothing. Every single attempt she had made to expose me, to find some shred of evidence that she could use against me, had led her nowhere. I had planned everything too perfectly, I had kept my mouth shut. I had made no mistakes, and I had left no trail for her to follow. The only thing she had was the growing frustration of knowing that I had outsmarted her, that I had taken my freedom without asking for permission, and that she was completely powerless to do anything about it. And that was when she finally snapped. I didn't even check my phone until hours later, after my spa day had come to an end, and I was lounging in a shaded cabana, a cold drink in my hand, and the sound of the ocean lapping gently against the shore just a few feet away. When I finally glanced at my notifications, I saw it, the final, desperate move that I had been waiting for. Ashley had booked a flight, and she was coming straight to me. I had known she would come the moment I saw her message, the barely concealed rage behind each letter practically vibrating through the screen, her impulsive nature pushing her to take the most dramatic course of action possible. Ashley had never been the type to accept being ignored, especially when she felt wronged, and I had given her nothing but silence since the moment she started her ridiculous mission to expose me. She had tried guilt, manipulation, and even outright invasion of my privacy, and when none of that worked, when she realized she had no control over me anymore, she did the only thing she knew how to do. She escalated. So when I heard the unmistakable sound of a car pulling up to the villa's gated entrance, followed by the distant but familiar voice of a woman arguing with security, I didn't even flinch. I merely sighed, taking my time adjusting my sunglasses, tilting my head slightly to get a better angle of the ocean while swirling the champagne in my glass, watching as the golden liquid caught the sunlight. The infinity pool reflected the endless blue sky, the gentle breeze carrying the scent of salt water and fresh citrus from the garden, a perfect contrast to the absolute storm that was about to unfold on my doorstep. I heard footsteps stomping up the stone pathway before I even turned my head, the sound of expensive but impractical heels clicking furiously against the smooth tile, each step an announcement of the confrontation Ashley had likely been rehearsing in her head during the entire flight over. She didn't knock, didn't hesitate, didn't take a single moment to consider whether she was actually welcome. She simply burst onto the terrace like a woman on a mission, her sunglasses pushed up onto her head, her expression a mix of outrage and disbelief, as if she had just uncovered the crime of the century. "Are you serious right now?" she demanded, her voice sharper than usual, her frustration barely contained as she gestured wildly toward the luxurious villa surrounding us, as if I myself hadn't been fully aware of where I was. "You're actually here, just living it up, while we're stuck at that nightmare of a resort?" I took another slow sip of my champagne, letting the crisp, chilled bubbles linger on my tongue before finally setting my glass down on the side table, giving her nothing but a calm, neutral expression as I adjusted the strap of my silk robe. She looked like she had barely slept, her makeup slightly smudged from what I could only assume was a rushed and stressful journey, her usual polished demeanor faltering under the weight of her own anger. "I don't remember inviting you," I said smoothly, my voice relaxed, my body language completely unbothered despite the absolute meltdown happening in front of me. "So, what exactly are you doing here, Ashley?" "What am I doing here?" she repeated, her voice rising slightly, her arms crossing over her chest in a way that was meant to be intimidating but only came across as petulant. "Oh, I don't know. Maybe I'm trying to understand how you sat there and let us all believe you were broke, only to turn around and book this ridiculous luxury trip for yourself." I raised an eyebrow, my lips twitching slightly at the sheer audacity of her words, the absolute entitlement dripping from every syllable. "I never said I was broke," I reminded her, my tone patient but firm, as if I were explaining something incredibly simple to a child who refused to listen. "I said I couldn't afford your trip. There's a very big difference." Her mouth opened and closed for a moment, as if she were scrambling to come up with a counterargument that didn't immediately collapse under the weight of logic. I could see the gears turning in her head, the desperate attempt to find some angle where she was the victim, where I was the villain, where she could somehow justify this entire ridiculous stunt she had pulled by flying out here uninvited. "You're selfish," she finally spat out, her voice laced with accusation, her eyes narrowing in frustration when I didn't react the way she had expected. "Family is supposed to be there for each other." I laughed then, a quiet, amused chuckle that only seemed to infuriate her more. shaking my head slightly as I leaned back against the cushioned lounge chair, stretching my legs out in front of me. "Like you were when I was paying?" I asked, my voice calm but pointed, watching as her expression flickered with something dangerously close to guilt before she quickly masked it with more indignation. "Because as far as I remember, for the last 5 years, I've been there for all of you every single time a vacation was planned. I was there when the flights were booked, when the hotel deposits were due, when the group dinners mysteriously landed on my tab. And yet, the second I decided to stop, the second I chose to put myself first, suddenly I'm the selfish one." She exhaled sharply, her hands gripping the sides of her designer purse, like she was moments away from throwing it onto the ground in frustration. "That's not the point, Rachel," she snapped, her voice growing more desperate now, less angry and more pleading, as if she was realizing too late that she had lost this argument before it had even started. "You could have just told us. You didn't have to lie, didn't have to go behind our backs like this." I exhaled slowly, taking my time before responding, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make her uncomfortable. "Ashley," I said finally, my voice softer now, but unwavering. "I didn't go behind your backs. I just stopped giving you access to my life." She stared at me then, truly stared, as if it was only just now sinking in that she had never actually deserved the level of entitlement she had so effortlessly claimed over my time, my money, and my decisions. And then, just to twist the knife a little deeper, I smiled, tilting my head slightly as I delivered the final blow. "By the way," I said casually, reaching for my phone and tapping the screen as if I were checking something mundane, "I've already booked this villa for next year, just for me." Ashley's face went pale, her mouth parting slightly as if she had just been physically struck, the realization hitting her like a truck that this wasn't just some rebellious stunt, but a permanent shift in the way things were going to be from now on. Without another word, she turned on her heel and stormed off, her heels clicking furiously against the tile as she disappeared back down the pathway toward the waiting car, her shoulders tense, her entire body radiating frustration and disbelief. I watched her go, feeling nothing but satisfaction as I reached for my champagne again, taking another slow sip before letting out a contented sigh. Ashley might have left, but I had a feeling the family wasn't done yet. I had barely set my phone down after watching Ashley storm off when the notifications started rolling in again, the family group chat lighting up like a flashing neon sign warning me of the chaos I had just unleashed. I knew exactly how this would go before even reading a single word, because this was their pattern, the same manipulative cycle they had relied on for years. First came the outrage, then came the guilt trip, and finally, if all else failed, the desperate attempt to convince me that I had somehow wronged them in ways they could never fully articulate, but expected me to fix anyway. The first message was from my mother, her words carefully chosen to sound more like disappointment than outright anger, as if appealing to my conscience would somehow make me rethink everything I had just said. "Rachel, I don't understand why you felt the need to lie to us. We are family, and family doesn't do things like this to each other." Before I could even think of how to respond, my aunt chimed in, taking a much more direct and emotionally charged approach. "We have always included you in everything, and you turn around and pull something like this? Do you even care about us at all?" Then, unsurprisingly, my uncle, who had never contributed a single dime to any trip we had ever taken but had always been the first to take advantage of my generosity, decided to throw in his 2 cents. "Wow. After everything we've done together, this is how you treat us? Just selfish beyond words." I let the messages keep coming, scrolling through each one with mild amusement as they all took turns attempting to spin the situation in their favor, twisting reality into a version where they were the victims and I was the ungrateful villain who had abandoned them without warning. But the truth, which they were all conveniently ignoring, was simple. I had spent years covering the cost of their vacations, treating them to luxuries they could never afford on their own, and not once had they ever expressed real appreciation for it. They had expected it, treated it as a given, convinced themselves that my financial stability somehow made me responsible for ensuring they got to experience things they had never worked for. But they had mistaken kindness for obligation, and that was their mistake, not mine. I finally decided to respond, keeping my words simple and clear. unwilling to give them the satisfaction of dragging me into a back-and-forth debate that would lead nowhere. I didn't lie. I just stopped paying. If that feels like betrayal, maybe ask yourselves why. For the first time in what felt like forever, the group chat went completely silent. I knew they were reading it, sitting with it, trying to figure out how to respond without admitting that I was right. I could practically see the looks on their faces, the frustration, the quiet understanding that they couldn't argue against the truth no matter how badly they wanted to. Ashley, who I had expected to jump in immediately, said nothing, probably still too humiliated from our earlier confrontation to engage just yet. And then, something happened that I hadn't anticipated. One of my cousins, the one who had always stayed quiet during family drama, finally spoke up. Honestly, Rachel has a point. She's been paying for years. Maybe we should have handled this differently. Another long pause followed, this one even heavier than before, and for the first time, I felt the shift in the dynamic, the undeniable realization that not everyone in the family was willing to blindly follow Ashley's lead anymore. Someone else, another cousin, added a simple, "Yeah, kinda makes sense." That was all it took to unravel everything Ashley had been trying to build. Because now, instead of being a unified front against me, they were questioning themselves, questioning the entitlement they had never truly acknowledged before. And Ashley, who had relied so much on the idea that the family would always side with her, was now watching as the very people she had counted on to back her up were realizing that maybe, just maybe, I had been justified in what I did. She didn't respond to the group chat for days after that, probably seething in silence, trying to find a way to turn things back in her favor. But the damage was already done, and deep down I think she knew it. Months passed, and I carried on with my life, unbothered and completely at peace with the decision I had made. I booked another solo vacation, this time planning even more carefully, ensuring that no one in the family would have any idea where I was going. It felt good, freeing, knowing that I was no longer tied to their expectations, no longer responsible for their experiences, no longer obligated to play the role they had forced upon me for years. And then, just as I was finalizing my itinerary, I received a message I never could have anticipated. Ashley. Hey, so I saw your last trip was amazing, and I was thinking maybe next time we could go together? No hard feelings, right? I stared at my phone for a long moment, rereading the words over and over, barely able to believe the sheer audacity it took for her to send that message after everything that had happened. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of what she had done, just a casual attempt to slide back into my plans as if nothing had ever happened. And that was when I knew, without a single doubt, that I had made the right decision. I didn't reply. I just smirked, blocked her number, and booked my trip. Because sometimes saying no is the biggest flex of all.